Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then, the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Colleen, and let's just get into some weird stuff. So I was thinking and perusing the internet, as I always am, for weird stuff, and I stumbled upon a bunch of YouTube videos of people who live in other countries and what you should and shouldn't do in other countries versus kind of what we do here in America. I'm speaking mainly in the US, like what you should not do when you go to these countries. And it kind of shows you this weird side of other countries, like things that we do that are totally normal and something that you don't even think about, but strangely enough, you can't do in other countries. So I thought we'd talk about that today. And I thought we'd start off with Japan, because I watch a lot of YouTubers who live in Japan, and I like to watch those, and I like to watch just people who live in other countries and the food that they can find on any street corner and stuff they recommend, that kind of stuff. My neck just popped. I don't know if you could hear that, but I for sure could. So I thought we'd start off in Japan, and let's start off with chopsticks. So here in the US, when you're eating at a Japanese restaurant, Chinese restaurant, whatever, and you're using chopsticks, most of the time when you're done or you need to get up or something, you just kind of shove them in your bowl and you walk out and do whatever, come back. And this is something you should actually never do in Japan. And at first I was like, why can I not just stick my chopsticks in my rice and leave? Well, apparently you should never stick your chopsticks vertically in any bowl of rice. And the reason is because it resembles a funeral ritual. So if you need to put them down, there's usually a chopstick holder next to your plate, and you can put those in that and not in vertically in your rice. Now, this is not the only chopstick taboo, I guess, that you should avoid. Apparently, the other thing you should avoid is using your chopsticks to pass food to someone else's chopsticks. Apparently, when you share dishes, you should take the food and put it on your plate before eating it. And you're not supposed to rub chopsticks together or anything like that because it's rude. Apparently, it's just rude to do that. You don't do it that way. And I could kind of see this, but I just thought it was so strange that, there are so many little things like this that we would do and not even think of, but you really shouldn't do if you're going to, Japan or some other country. Now let's talk shoes. Now it's probably pretty well known that you should take your shoes off when going into someone's home in Japan and that kind of stuff. But there are actually a lot more places where the no shoe rule applies. So if you're visiting a home or something, there should be a little area when you walk in to remove your shoes, and you should replace them with indoor slippers. And you leave your shoes in the entranceway, you don't bring them in, that kind of thing. Now, this rule extends to traditional, I'm just losing my words today. Ooh, I don't have enough caffeine in my system. But this also goes for temples or shrines, some fitting rooms, schools, and hospitals. Now, most of the time, there should be slippers that are available, so you're not just what do I do? But there are some areas that you don't even or shouldn't even wear slippers. And these are more like traditional places to eat, or traditional like hotels or whatever you're staying in that have the tatami mats, because the tatami mats, if you wore the slippers on top, there's a possibility that you could hurt the mats themselves by wearing the slippers on them. So they say that you should just wear your socks. Also, make sure that your socks are free of holes, because that's a rude thing. Now, I can understand for the cleanliness of your home, or, you know, for the cleanliness of these very traditional places and that kind of stuff, or hospitals or whatnot, to not wear your, shoes inside. I get that. But this goes a step further sometimes. And that's when you go to the bathroom. Now, sometimes if you go to the bathroom, you need to exchange your indoor slippers for special toilet slippers. And these are usually placed next to the, bathroom door or toilet door or what have you, where you'd switch those out and then use the toilet and then come out, and you got to remember to switch back. Because I think it's a cleanliness thing and a bacterial thing. But this, I don't know, it's a lot of slippers for a lot of different things. Like I said, I could really understand using the different slippers to go in and out of the home and that kind of thing. But to just use different slippers when you go into the toilet, like, I had no idea about this. I didn't know this was a thing at all. And I also had, I don't know, it's just something, it's just weird. It's weird to think about that you need slippers for indoors, slippers for the toilet, but you got to remember to put your slippers back on for indoors once you leave the toilet. I don't know, I'd get very, very confused, I think, at that point. But I do see the cleanliness aspect. I've tried to do this before in my home, but it never works out. Like, I really have to enforce it if I do, which I might at some point, but we'll see. I usually don't wear shoes in my home in general, just because it's not comfortable. But I don't have like special slippers, if that makes sense. Another thing I don't understand, and this is just from the point of view of I've never been to Japan, and I've never been in a home that really respects these types of rules. I wonder if I've got my indoor slippers and I don't want to bring them into the toilet, could I just take my indoor slippers off and go in, like, I guess barefoot would be kind of gross, but maybe in my socks? I don't know. What do you think about this? And do any of you guys out there that are listening follow these rules in your home? If you're in the US or wherever you are, do you do the no shoe rule in your home, and is it to this extent? Also, do any of you guys have toilet slippers? I'm so curious. I'm honestly really curious about this. I feel like I just forget all the time to put on my toilet slippers. And like, if I really had to go to the bathroom, I definitely forget to put on my toilet slippers. I just want to know, and you should let me know on the social medias. I'm always on there. Sometimes I'm a little late when it comes to posting, like photos and stuff like that on there, but I'm always on there to listen to you guys, hear your guys' feedback, all that kind of fun stuff. On the Twitter, it's at GSMC_weird news, and the Facebook page is GSMC Weird News on Facebook. I am there all the time. I'm ready to listen to you guys, and also just let me know if there's anything that you guys like know etiquette-wise, I guess, in other places that I didn't talk about, or things that you guys do specifically in your home that other people don't do. I don't know. I think these things are so weird to see the differences between what we do in an every day-to-day versus what, people in another country do on a day-to-day, and it's not acceptable for me to do what I'm usually doing, or it's very weird to them. I don't know. It's a very strange topic altogether. That's why I thought I'd kind of bring this to light today and go through a few different countries and talk about all the different strange etiquette and things you can't do in these countries versus what things that we can do in the United States. Once again, I'm speaking solely on the United States because that is where I'm from. But a lot of times these things kind of overlap. Now, I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue on with some more weird things that you shouldn't do in other countries.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. Now, this entire podcast, we are talking about things you can and cannot do in other countries versus in the United States. So, like, weird things that you wouldn't think are not okay to do in other countries, if that makes sense. But let me just explain. So we're talking about Japan right now in specific. We talked about the no shoe rule. We talked about some chopstick etiquette. Now let's talk about the trains. Now I've been on trains in New York, like the subways, and I've been on the metros and stuff like that in England and also in France. In different areas, obviously, but I've been on these different types of transportation and realized that there is different etiquette when it comes to other countries and things that you just don't think about. So when you get on the train in like New York or something like that, you wait for people to get off and then you kind of just shove your way in. That's how it goes. First come, first serve, everyone's standing on the platform trying to get the closest to the door, that kind of thing. But in Japan, it's like a whole nother world. This is like so crazy to me when I heard this for the first time. So apparently you're expected to find single file lines that you wait in so that you can go in like single file. So this includes at bus stops, train platforms, elevators, vending machines, street food vendors, all that kind of thing. Now, specifically on like platforms at train stations and stuff, there are lines on the floor which indicate where to stand to wait for your train. So you can't just kind of stand wherever you want. You should, if you're waiting for that train, you should stand within the lines within your single file kind of thing. And when the doors open, they open exactly between the parallel lines that are formed so that you can, the people coming out can come out and then you can go single file into the train. I thought this was really interesting and kind of like strange because I don't know, it's so different. Like I said, I've been on trains in France and England, and there's none of this in either of those, and the same in New York. Not like none of their subways, metros, whatever you want to call them, are like this whatsoever. They're, it's all kind of, you just wait, then you kind of get on. I noticed that when you're in England and France, people are more courteous to the people coming off, whereas in New York, it's kind of like people kind of come off and you're just shimming your way through. Also, the metros in England are the cleanest I've ever seen. Just saying, super clean compared. And I can imagine that the trains in Japan are very, very clean as well. But also, it just seems that this is just so well organized in a way, and I kind of wish we had this everywhere. I kind of wish this was a thing everywhere, and I had no idea that they did this. Because once again, I've never been there, so I've never experienced this. Man, do I want to go, but I've never experienced this. I've never seen this kind of thing before where there are specific places you need to stand to wait, and then it's very courteous, very, single file. And I really like the way that is. I feel like it makes things a lot more efficient. Just in my personal, I don't know, preferences, I guess. I feel like it would work better. Let me know if any of you guys have been to Japan, any of you guys are from Japan, I don't know. And let me know if you feel like this is more efficient than any other type of train or metro or anything that you've been on before. Once again, you can tell me on the social medias at GSMC_Weird News on Twitter and the GSMC Weird News Facebook page. Now let's move on to eating on the go. So fast food is sold at like street stands. There are stalls with food, all that kind of stuff. But food is eaten in designated areas, often marked with lines on the pavement. I've also seen this in a few of those YouTube videos, like I was telling you about, that I've watched, where they say not to really stand. You need to go find a place to sit down and then eat. It's not something where you can just kind of walk and eat. Apparently, walking and eating is rude. Now, drinks are bought from many vending machines, and also consumed immediately and tossed in a recycling bin, that kind of thing. But it doesn't seem to be as much of an issue to drink and walk as it is to eat and walk. I can see how this is kind of a thing, it's a courteous thing, but also maybe a good thing that you're not going to run into people while you're trying to eat food. Just saying. Now, apparently also eating and drinking on public transport is bad manners, which I could also see. I've seen a lot of people on public transportation just like stuffing their face, and I think I've been that before. I've ate like chips or something on a public transportation, and I can see how that could be really rude. So I can see how these things are it, but I'm also a little surprised that you can't just eat and walk. Like everywhere in the US, it's eating and walking no matter where you are. You get a pizza downtown somewhere, you walk around to eat your pizza. Like there's not always a place to stop and eat. But apparently you gotta stop and eat if you're in Japan. Like I had said about the you shouldn't eat on public transport, there's also an exception to this, and that's long distance trains. Apparently long distance trains also offer food and stuff, and you can eat on those, but they say not to eat on shorter distance trains or on buses or any other sort of public transportation. Now let's move it on over to blowing your nose. So blowing your nose in Japan, like in public, is considered rude, which it's kind of secretly considered rude in the US, but nobody says it. So they tell you to like find a private place to blow your nose if you really have it. Now you see a lot of people that wear like those face masks, and it's apparently so if they're cold, they're not going to spread germs, or maybe to avoid catching whatever's out there, or that kind of thing. They're also kind of a fashion statement now because they come in all sorts of colors and all that kind of stuff, which is cool. But if you're in Japan or like sick or something, not feeling good, or you can see a lot of people doing that, maybe you should also grab a mask, put it on, just because you don't want to spread germs, you don't want to do that, and don't blow your nose in public. It's rude. That's all I gotta say about that. It's rude. I personally don't like blowing my nose in public at all, and I will go to a private place, so I think I would be totally fine if I went there, because I am not about to blow my nose in public. I don't know. It's just something personal to me. What do you think about that? My husband does it. He doesn't care. I know a lot of people who do it, and it's not that big of a deal. And it really isn't that big of a deal. And it's not something you would think about, too. Like, if you went to Japan and you're just like, oh, man, I gotta blow my nose. You wouldn't think about sitting there and just blowing your nose in public would be this big of an issue, but it can be. Just remember that it's a very rude thing, and you should really kind of stray from that. I would just kind of keep away from blowing your nose in public if you're heading on over to the Japan. I've not had enough caffeine today, and I need help. I'm just I'm so tired, and my words are just meshing together. Let me know if you guys think it's rude to blow your nose in public. I'm just curious. I think it's a little rude. I don't like to hear it, but that's just my personal opinion. Now I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I will continue on maybe a few more things about Japan, and maybe we'll move on to a different country.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. Now, this entire podcast, we are talking about things we do in the US that you can't do in other states. It's really weird, like this normal stuff you think you can do, but you actually can't do. I don't know. It's real strange to me. And we are specifically talking about Japan right now, but we are going to move over countries in just a minute. But the last thing I want to say about Japan is tipping. Let's talk about tipping. And this is actually in a lot of different countries besides the United States. So tipping is not a thing in Japan. You don't tip. If you leave a tip, it can be taken as an insult. So when you're paying the bill, this is paying their, your waiter's, salary or hourly or whatever, because they're not paid the same way they are here, where you're paid very low and then you make majority of your money based off of the tips, whereas you're just paid your normal kind of pay in Japan working at a restaurant or something like that. Taxi drivers will also refuse if you tip them as well. Now, this is something that I find really interesting since it's so well known. You gotta tip. Like, you gotta tip in the US. Like, that's something you don't want to be rude. Unless your waiter is really rude or something like that. You're usually tipping your waiter pretty good or your waitress really well. Because you want to show that you appreciate them and give them that money because they're working their butt off and not making the money they should be making. Now, another thing that I find pretty interesting about Japan is most of the time when you're at a restaurant, you're not waiting for your waiter to come up to you and ask you what you want. You're not trying to make that weird eye contact to get something from them if you need more water or more whatever. There's actually usually like bells or buttons at your table or whatever, and you press that and that alerts the waiter to come to you. So you don't have to do that weird like wavy, hey, I need more stuff kind of thing, which I think we should do everywhere. Like, why are we not doing this everywhere? Because it's so uncomfortable, and they find it really rude if you're trying to flag them down any other way. And I find it really uncomfortable trying to get your waiter to come to you, and you're like, sticking your hand up, trying to make that, like, serious eye contact with them as they're walking by. I think this is such a more efficient way to get things done. I don't know. I think this is fantastic. Let me know what you guys think. Now let's move on from Japan and come on over to South Korea. Now, there are a lot of things that they do similar to Japan, like with the no shoe rule and that kind of thing. But let's talk about clothing. So if you're going to Korea, you better cover up, ladies. Because while short skirts and shorts are commonplace for women in like major Korean cities, exposed shoulders and low-cut tops are actually considered taboo. So if it gets really hot and you're in Korea and it gets really hot, loose-fitting t-shirts are your best bet here. So pack appropriately if you're going to South Korea. You don't want to show any sort of cleavage, and if you are going to show any sort of cleavage or you bring some sort of tank top, prepare for nasty stares. Now, this is kind of strange to me that they can wear as shorts or skirts as they want, but any sort of exposed shoulders or low-cut tops are not okay. I don't know. I find this a little strange. Let me know what you think. I know that here in the United States, it's kind of like whatever. I wear a lot of exposed shouldered shirts. I like tank tops, that kind of thing. But if I'm going to South Korea, that's the last thing I'm going to pack because I don't want those stares. Looks. Stairs kind of started sounding like stairs you walk up. So, with that being said, just remember to pack appropriately. And I think it's, it's strange because I notice that a lot of K-pop stars do kind of wear tank tops and that kind of thing, but you can't if you're, I guess, not, because it's looked down upon and seen as very taboo. But let's move on from clothes and go over to accepting presents. Now, if you're accepting anything from somebody or passing something at a dinner table, or even giving the cash, like the check to your cashier or money or whatever, you need to use both hands. Now, apparently the correct way to hand something to someone is to place your left hand on the inside of your right wrist as you extend your arm with payment or whatever it is. Now, when accepting things, you should do the same but with your right hand. So I guess if you're left-handed, sorry, this maybe just be careful. But apparently this is the correct way to do things, and it's rude if you accept things with one hand, and so just remember when you're paying or whatever to accept things with both hands. Now, I found this one really strange because why should it matter? In the United States, we always hand things with one hand, grab things with one hand, or you use one hand to give something and one hand to take something. But here, it's a whole etiquette of both hands to take, or to give, both hands to take, or vice versa. I don't know why. I was looking and I couldn't really find why you do this, but apparently that's just how you do things, and it's rude to not. Now, apparently this also extends to shaking hands, which is very strange. I know a good firm handshake, your one hand in the other hand, and you firm handshake, and you shake that hand. But apparently when shaking hands, you gotta use both. Or at least you place your left hand on your right wrist for support. And a slight bow is always a polite gesture, but apparently shake hands with both hands, or at least use one hand to support the other when you're shaking hands. I don't know. I thought this was really strange, this whole two-hand thing, not only with shaking hands, but with accepting and giving things. I don't get it. I don't see why this is such a big thing, but it is definitely something that you should remember if you're gonna go to South Korea. You don't want to be rude. But this is not something we do in the United States. Not at all. Shaking hands, that's their one hand. You make a good shake with, they extend a hand, you extend the opposite hand, and you do a good shake. You give things one hand, it's just normal. I don't think I give gifts with two hands unless I'm presenting something. And I guess maybe that's what it is. You're kind of presenting something. But receiving, I don't know. Tell me if you know why. Let me know on the social medias at GSMC_Weird News on Twitter and GSMC Weird News on Facebook. I'm on there and I want to know, why do you do this? Why is this a thing? Also, tell me if this is kind of how you receive or give things or shake hands or what have you. I mean, I've done double-handed handshakes. You give the one hand, you take your other, and you make a good handshake, like sincere or, or friendly or something along those lines. But I just don't see why you have to all like support your wrist or whatever if you're not going to double hand. I don't know. I just don't get it at all. And apparently you're also supposed to keep your hands to yourself because they don't like touching people. So most of the time, I don't even think you're going to really be shaking hands at all. Well, I'm going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about some more things that you shouldn't do when you're in Korea.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and one championship. We got the fights covered. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. Now, before the break in this entire podcast, we're talking about the wondrous weird. Yep, that's where my brain is today. We are talking about the wondrous weird world of etiquette, I guess. Things that you should or shouldn't do in different countries versus what you do normally in like the United States. Once again, I'm talking mainly versus the United States because that is where I'm from. Now, we've talked about etiquette, like things you shouldn't do in Japan, and we've started to talk about things you shouldn't do in South Korea. Now, we talked about keeping your hands to yourself, shaking hands, accepting things, and covering up. Now let's talk about age, because age is really important. It's really about status and seniority in a relationship between friends or other. And you should be prepared for complete strangers to ask you your age, which if that happens in the US, that is one of the rudest things you can do. But apparently it's very, very, very common in Korea. And it's because it establishes the seniority in the relationship or in the conversation or what have you. And like in Korea, you're actually older than you think you are because everyone, I've talked about this before, everyone is born and it's said to be 1 year old, which is real strange, but just kind of remember that when you're talking about it. Now, that goes along with the lines of eating and drinking. So when you're out with a bunch of people and somebody who is your senior or elder is offering you a drink, you cannot refuse. You have to take that drink. And it's also very impolite to pour your own drink. Now, this drinking and elder thing also goes along to your eating. Now, once again, if you're dining with a bunch of people, it is very impolite for you to start eating first. You cannot start eating until the eldest person in your group has taken their first bite. Then you can continue or start eating. It's very impolite if you just don't. So no matter how hungry you are, you better hope that elder at your table is hungrier than you, because you need to wait until they take their first bite. It's very rude if you don't. And it kind of like signifies the start of the meal once the elder takes the first bite. Now, this is not something I've ever gone by, I guess, when it comes to eating. The only time that I followed any sort of like wait till somebody eats is on like birthday parties, where it's like you kind of want the birthday girl or boy or whatever to have the first bite of cake or the first bite of the meal. But even then, most of the time, nobody follows that rule. So I don't know. I think it would be really kind of weird, especially if you're in a group with a bunch of friends who you don't know who the oldest is and you're just kind of eating, then obviously that's not going to apply, I guess. I don't know. But I guess that kind of goes along the lines with asking your age when you first meet them, so they kind of figure out their seniority and your seniority when it comes to the friendship or the relationship that you are hashing out. Now let's move on to some unlucky stuff. So let's talk about the number 4. So apparently the number 4 is really unlucky in Korea because it sounds like the word death. It's very similar. So many buildings actually won't have a 4th floor, and if they do, it's actually labeled F instead of being, the 4th floor. It's also considered like unlucky to give gifts in 4 and that kind of thing. This is really interesting to me because I know that a lot of hotels in the US actually don't have a 13th floor, and they usually just skip the number if they go higher than that. Which I always thought was pretty funny because I don't think 13's an unlucky number whatsoever. It's actually my favorite number. But I think it's really funny that it's the number 4. And for us, it's 13 because it's just, I don't know, notorious for being unlucky, I guess. Whereas 4 in Korean actually sounds similar to the word death. So there's an actual meaning behind skipping 4 instead of just, oh, it's kind of unlucky. Remember, 13's kind of that unlucky number. Now, besides that being kind of unlucky, there's another thing that you shouldn't do, which is write somebody's name in red ink. Now, this is because it's considered a bad omen because apparently dead people's names are written in red ink. So you do not write this in red ink. Now, I was reading a blog about this and from people's perspectives, and this lady said that she was yelled at by a room full of students when they started writing one of their names on a whiteboard in a red marker, and they were just upset and screaming because apparently, dead people's names are written in red ink and they're not dead. So it's a very bad kind of omen when it comes to that. I've never seen something like that. I guess we just use the same color ink to write dead and alive people's names, and I'm still alive, so hopefully. I don't know. It's interesting that these things are considered, a bad omen or bad things, like the number 4 and writing your name in red. I bet any person living in South Korea, if you wrote their name 4 times in the letter red, would kill you or be so mad at you. But I think it's kind of funny that that's what's considered a bad omen there. When that's none of that applies to the US at all. Now let's talk hand gestures. Now, be careful with hand gestures anywhere you go, 'cause sometimes what you're meaning by hand gesture is not perceived the same way because it's different. And this goes with hailing cabs in South Korea. So apparently when you're hailing a cab, you should be sure that your palm is facing down and you move all your fingers in one sweeping motion. Making this gesture palm up, which we do in most other countries, is actually insulting in Korea because that's how they call their dogs. So then you're kind of looking like you're calling a dog when you're just trying to hail a cab. Now, this is not how I call my dogs. I call my dogs by just yelling at them like, hey, get over here. Hey, you, get over here. That kind of thing. But I guess this is how they, call their dogs. And so if you're going to do this, it's going to be rude. I've been trying to do this motion with my hand this entire time, and I'm not 100% sure how you do it. So that's definitely something I would kind of observe before I tried to hail a cab in Korea, because I'm not too sure how to do it. That goes with a lot of things where they're explaining to you how to do things hand-wise without showing you. This is something I'd like to see because I don't know what to do with my hand. I'm really trying and I'm really not sure what to do with my hand. Palm down. All right. We're trying again. Palm down, waving, all fingers in, sweeping. I don't know. I can't do it. Either that or I'm doing it right and it just feels wrong. I don't know. I thought this one was really weird because that's definitely not something you think about when you're like hailing a cab, what you're doing with your hands versus what you should or shouldn't be doing. So just be wary, that's a thing. Now I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about one more do not in Korea and move on to a different country.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. Now, this entire podcast, we've been talking about the wondrous, weird world of etiquette. So basically things that you shouldn't do in other countries versus America, like things that we would normally do that you actually should not do. Now, we've talked about Japan and South Korea, and I want to do one more little tip about South Korea, and then we'll move on to some other countries. Now, let's talk about bathrooms. And this is more on the lines of toilet paper. So, when you're in a Korean bathroom, there should be a bin for toilet paper. And you should not toss your toilet paper in the toilet. That goes for feminine products as well. Do not throw your toilet paper in the toilet or your feminine products. And this is because the plumbing systems can't actually handle the waste. So basically, you're saving yourself the embarrassment of clogging up a toilet. So just don't put anything, which is kind of funny because there are a lot of people who throw toilet paper, like we throw toilet paper down the toilet at all the time here in the US. All the time. That's what you do. But I've never been one to throw feminine products in the toilet. I just have always been told that that's not what you do. I've been always been told that you can't because it will clog your toilet. And I've actually had this conversation not too long ago with a good friend of mine, and she was saying that she did, and I was like, I didn't think you can't do that, right? And she's like, no, you can with these specific whatever. And I was mind blown at the fact that people actually threw their feminine products down the toilet. I always thought you put it in the bin, in the trash. So that I wouldn't have an issue with, but remembering to throw the toilet paper into a bin instead of into the toilet would be a little difficult. Just remember that so you're not stuck in a public bathroom clogging the toilets up on complete accident. I mean, most of the time when you're clogging the toilets, it's complete accident. If you're doing it on purpose, I need you to reevaluate yourself. But it's always an accident, but you don't want to be that, person, the embarrassed foreigner who clogged the toilet again. So let's move on to France, actually. I've been here. I've been to France before, and I want to talk about some of the etiquette and see if I noticed any of these as well. I wrote down a lot. I don't remember most of them, but I was just kind of curious to see if I would remember any of this etiquette from when I went, because it's been a very, very long time. So let's talk about never getting your waiter's attention by waving wildly. So this is really rude. If your waiter doesn't come soon enough, the best thing to do is to make eye contact or, slightly raise a hand. Don't, make a huge thing about it. It's real rude. I get that. The thing is with this is I don't remember much about that, but I do remember when you're going to eat, remember it's going to take a bit. The French like to do long, kind of drawn out dinners and foods and stuff like that. And I kind of enjoy having that time between each course or what have you. But my dad, when we went, cause I went with my family, my dad got very, very impatient at one, and he was just so mad. He wanted the check and he wanted to get out of there. And he was like, I'm done eating. Nah, 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 it's taking forever. But that's just kind of the thing there, is you got to kind of just wait it out. Sometimes it takes a while, and that's okay. It's okay to just kind of relax. And if you're on a vacation, just chill out, man. Chill out. Now let's talk about not speaking louder than everyone else. This is actually something I saw on the Korean and Japanese ones when I was doing the research for this. But it's just, you don't want to be louder than anyone else. You want to keep everything relatively the same, and this goes especially at nighttime, because most levels of noises when you're in a village or towns are very quiet, and you don't want people getting mad at you because you're making a ruckus. So just kind of keep your voice down, keep it down, and you'll be fine. Now, this next one I found really funny. I don't remember if I really even had a phone at this time. But this kind of cracks me up because this is something I see nonstop all the time in the US. And that's having your phone out when you're having coffee or food with a friend. Now, this is not a thing. There are times when you have to check your phone, and that's okay. But it's apparently socially unacceptable to have your phone on the table as if you're waiting for somebody to contact you. This is like a do not use it during meals or drink. It's super rude. You want to be spending your time with your friend or whoever you're at this meal or coffee with. And it's just real rude to have your phone out at all times. And I get that. I know at my parents' house when I lived there, and even when I go up there now, there's a big thing, no phones at the table. We just don't. And I think that's really great, because then you have to sit there and talk. Now, I'm very guilty of being the person who has their phone on the table or out when we're eating or whatever, because most of the time the other people do too. And a lot of times I feel uncomfortable by that. And so what I'll do, like if I'm going out with my husband or something, is I'll just put my phone down. When he's on his phone, I'll be like, oh, sounds like fun, kind of encouraging to get off the phone so we can have an actual conversation. And most of the time it kind of works. When you put your phone down, the person around you will be like, okay, well, they're not on their phone. I'll get off mine, and then you can sit there and have the conversation, or, just enjoy each other's company. So I really like the fact that this is kind of unacceptable and you shouldn't do this. Just personally, I don't know. How do you feel about it? I mean, if I'm eating dinner at home and I'm watching TV, that's whatever, but I don't know. Most of the things when I was doing the research for this, most of the things were more a polite gesture, and then you kind of just sit there and realize how rude we could be in the US, I guess. And I mean, it's our norm. It's our cultural norm, so that's fine. And I just thought it was so weird that there are just little things that are so different from here and there, but they make a kind of a big difference, like not having your phone on the table when you're out with friends. Like, that makes a big difference. And I know it does, because you're more likely to have good time conversation, spending, time with your friends or whatever, not being on the phone. You're enjoying each other's company, which is kind of what you're trying to do going out with friends anyway, right? You're supposed to be enjoying each other's company. You're supposed to be spending time with each other, not spending time with each other and the phones. Like I said, I'm very guilty of having my phone out, because sometimes I'm not sure what to do and I get really anxious or something, and I'm like, okay, phone out. But I try my best when I'm with friends not to, unless I'm showing them stuff on phones. I don't know. It's still weird. And I don't know. The whole thing is weird. Everything's weird if you think about it. I'm weird. But it's just how the little things, because everywhere I go, I see somebody on their phone everywhere. Restaurants, I don't know, bowling alleys, everywhere. Everyone's on their phone at the movie theater. I mean, come on. Now, before I keep going on about phones, I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some more etiquette, things not to do, and we will continue on with France.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News podcast. Now, this entire podcast, we are talking and have been talking about the what not to do in different countries, like the weird differences between other countries and the US, like things if I went to one country or another, I could or couldn't do. Now, let's talk about France, because we were talking about France before the break, and I want to continue on with that. Like I said, I've been there. I've been there before, and there are some things, I'm kind of doing this to see if there were things that I noticed. You know, if I noticed any of these things, or they stood out to me. So there, I want to talk about one that really did. And this is about times to eat. Now, you can't just go and have food whenever, which in the US, you can go and have food pretty much whenever. But if you're going for lunch traditionally will start at midday or like just after and will run to about 2 p.m. or half past if you're lucky. Now, this is, after that, it's nothing. And a lot of times they take naps, which I want that in the US, a nap time. I mean, we should all do that in every single country, but I found that when we were there and we weren't planning to have lunch around this time, or we weren't hungry until a little later, we were kind of out of luck at that point because there was nothing we could really do. So a lot of times we'd pack snacks with us wherever we were going so we could eat just in case we didn't make it to a lunch, that kind of thing. Or if we had planned we wanted to go to lunch at a specific place, we would make sure to plan around those times because it really, it really goes by fast. A lunch goes by fast. Now let's talk about dinner. So dinner usually starts about 7 p.m., but most people actually won't eat until around 7:30. So if you go at 7, you're probably going to be the only person there eating. But around 7:30 at the earliest is when people start to go eat, and usually you can order till about 10. Now I noticed in France that things go a lot later than in the US when it comes to food. You eat later and you stay up a little bit later, and I don't know what that's about, but it feels natural when you're there. And I always thought that was really strange compared to here, where I'm like ready to bed at like 9 p.m. I'm not leaving the house after 8:30. Even then, I don't want to leave the house at 8 o'clock kind of thing. Whereas we're barely eating dinner in France at 7:30 maybe. So everything is a lot later, which I thought was kind of cool, to be honest. It was really nice, actually. But I just think it's kind of weird that it's so different here, even though we're known to have some sort of weird, crazy nightlife, which I don't participate in. I'm a homebody. But I don't know, it's just kind of strange to think that that's how it is. And it's a little bit different when you're there. I remember, like, we're eating late and I'm like, isn't it kind of late? And they're just opening or something. But it's weird because when you're there, it feels normal. It feels normal to eat at that time when you're there. And I don't know if it's just the feelings you get from France or what it is, but yeah, that's how it feels there. Now, speaking of nightlife, apparently you shouldn't get very wildly drunk. The French love their alcohol, but mostly in moderation. It's common to have a drink, and French love a drink with their dinner, but you will rarely find them drinking so much that they can't stand. And so they'll rarely have like half a pint of beer, and most of the time never a pint. And so it's more alcohol in moderation, even though they're kind of known for it, which is very strange because it's not what you think, but it's really, it's kind of nice, to be honest. Now let's bring it on back over to tipping. So we talked about tipping with Japan and how it's not a thing and actually rude. But let's talk about tipping here. So most of the time you don't have tipping in France, but there's a 15% service charge that's included on the bill most of the time. So that's kind of like your tip. The bill will say service comprise. I can't speak French. My mom can, but I can't. However, it's custom to leave an additional few euros at a dinner service if the service was exceptional. So you can tip if you had a really, really good service, but don't expect to do like 20% or anything like that. Just a little couple extra euros after dinner if it was exceptional, which I find kind of good. I don't know. Can we just pay our waiters correctly? It bothers me. Now let's talk about one more thing from France, and that is ice. So most of the time when you go anywhere in the United States and you get a drink, you get it filled with ice. They always put ice in your cup and then they put the drink in. But don't expect to get ice in your drink when you go to France. It's actually rare to find drinks with ice in them in France compared to North America. Now, I don't remember if I did get a lot of drinks with ice in them in France. It's been so long since I've been, and when I saw this, I was really sitting there thinking about it. I was like, okay, what did I get a lot of drinks with ice, or did I get any? I do remember a lot of chilled glasses, and that sort of thing, but I can't really recall if I had any or some drinks with ice in them. And I went a good around France. Started in Paris, and then we drove around back to Paris for about a week or two. And I can't remember. I can't recall. It's been so long. What I do know is every trip that I've taken, and this is just like a side rant, but every trip that I take, I get some sort of sick, and it's just like my body doesn't react well. And I don't remember if it was when I went to England or France, but my face broke out in the weirdest hives ever. Like, my whole face was just bumpy and gross, and so I tried not to take any photos at all whatsoever. And I avoided all the photos because my face was just filled with a rash. So that's a thing. So what do you guys think about this? I'm actually really curious to see what you guys think about any of these. And if you're in any of these countries or been in any of these countries, did these apply at all, or am I wrong? Let me know. Also, do you do any of these things in your daily life, or do you not? Or are any of these weird to you? Because a lot of these are real strange to me, since it's not my normal cultural norm. And that's normal cultural norm. And that's just kind of the whole point of today. It's other countries are weird. Every country is different. And every country is weird and has different types of etiquette that differ in one way or another from another. If that makes sense. That sounded like a bunch of garbled words. I'm so sorry. But I'm just curious on what you guys think. If you guys have any weird practices or anything like that, let me know. Hit me up on the social medias. I'm always on those. Sometimes I'm late to posting photos or videos or whatnot, but I'm still always on those. On Twitter at GSMC_Weird News, and on the Facebook page, which is GSMC Weird News. Always on there, always willing to talk to you guys, always like to talk to you guys. You guys are so nice. But let me know what you think about this, and if it's weird to you, because I thought it was pretty weird, to be honest. I've not been to a lot of countries. Let me know if you've been to a bunch of different countries, because I've only been to 2 other, and then that's about it. But I want to thank you guys so much for listening to me talk about all this different do's and don'ts in different countries and how they differ from the United States. And once again, guys, I want to thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'll talk to you in the next one.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.